Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for, I don't even know if this is, the 5th or 6th or 7th AMA already. We are very excited to have Megan here today. We'll be waiting a couple minutes for more folks to show up and join. As we know, usually Zoom life, people join 3, 4, 5 minutes later. So we'll give it a couple minutes and I'll try to put on some music if I can find that button. There we go.
You're going to really set the vibe for the talk with your
Oh, yes.
choice.
We're going into space.
All right.
Folks from all time zones.
It's so fun to see.
Mm-hmm. Berlin. Alrighty, we'll give it another 2 minutes before kicking off. First time joining a rally event. We'll give you a quick overview of what rally does before we kick off here. You might hear a little bit of it from Megan. She happens to be one of our favorite customers.
Oh, you will.
Ooh, yeah, it is a cool painting. All right, we'll wait one last minute and get started very soon. We'll do another AMA on the painting.
Yeah, I have to get more prepared to answer questions
Yes.
about the artwork.
That was the secret topic we didn't mention in all of our marketing.
Yes.
Yeah, and the preparation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Only those that join get the secrets of the painting.
Okay, I'll stop the music. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. If this is your first AMA with Rally, I will give a quick overview on what to expect for the next 55 or so minutes here. We'll kick off with some introductions of myself, Lauren, and Megan, just so you know who we all are, explain kind of the context of what we're going to be talking about here today. We usually start with about 15 to 20 minutes of some prepared questions for Megan today, specifically on the topic of continuous discovery. And we will spend the majority of the rest of the time doing live Q&A. So that's the fun part of these AMAs. You get to post in the chat, upvote each other's messages, and we'll try to answer and Megan will try to answer as many questions as possible throughout. And if we don't get to your questions, we sometimes will have Megan, and we'll kind of clean up the write-up after the fact and share it with you. So very excited to have you all today. We're in for a good one. For those that I don't know yet, my name is Oren. I am one of the co-founders and CEO here at Rally, and we are building a user research CRM that makes it very easy for teams to recruit and manage their own actual customers for research. So handling all participant management and recruitment automation, everything from email templates, screening, scheduling, consent forms, and incentives, all in one place. So of course, there's much more to share about that. If you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to me, request a demo. We can always get in more detail. And joined with me today is Lauren. Lauren, feel free to give a quick intro.
Sure, I'll give it a fast one. So I run content marketing at Rally. I'm behind all the blogs, all the communication you get for these events. So I will be writing up the recap. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, really excited to be here, and nice to meet everyone if I haven't already met you all.
Awesome. And without further ado, please welcome Megan, our AMA host. If you can please give a quick, brief intro into yourself and your role at Teachable, your background in research, that would be a great place to start.
Sure. Making it quick might be a challenge, but
well, yes,
I'll do what I
maybe
can.
Not quick.
So yes, my name is Megan. Really excited to be here. Thank you so much for putting these together, Oren. I've gotten so much out of them as a participant. So it's fun to be here in this seat this time. I currently work at a company called Teachable. I am a research team of one. I joined the company about a year ago. And I support a product organization of about, I forget how big we are now, 86, 87. We have 8 designers, 13 PMs, and I lose track of the engineers, I think 66 or 67 engineers. And part of my role is enabling all those folks to do research. And another part of my role is actually going out conducting research. So about 50-50, I would say, enabling and actually executing research. Before Teachable, jumping all the way back to the beginning of my career, I started out as a fine artist, as most of us in tech do. I studied fine art in college. I was a painter for a number of years. So ironic that we could, transition into discussing the painting behind me. I found my way from painting into the world of psychology. So I got a master's degree in counseling psychology and ended up doing mental health research as sort of my day job. And then I was a therapist on the side. When I was working in mental health research in sort of an academic setting, a lot of the projects that I was working on were actually online interventions that were delivered to patients. And so a lot of what I ended up doing was actually more UX research than one would think. And I found a way to kind of transition that experience and that background into UX work in a few agencies. Started in the startup world back in, I think, 2018. And ever since then have worked in ed tech, so educational technology companies, mostly pretty small, so under 200 people, which I think is kind of important context for how I think about continuous discovery and other things.
Wonderful. You kept that pretty quick. That was good.
Did my best.
And yes, and a good transition into the topic of continuous discovery. So maybe you can start by giving everyone a quick overview on the concept and maybe why you wanted to give a talk about this and why you're passionate about this.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I think it's so important to define our terms here, because I think when people say continuous discovery, they often mean very different things. I don't know that there is any like one right industry definition of continuous discovery. I can tell you how I have encountered different definitions and meanings of the term. I think my first sort of interaction with what I often think of as continuous discovery was when I worked at my previous company, OutSchool. Um, I was in a unique position of being hired onto the team before we hired any PMs. And as we started to bring in PMs, they would ask me, hey, can you help me set up an interview a week with a customer? And I would ask why. Like, what are you trying to learn? And oftentimes would get pretty vague responses back. And so I've come to realize that when product managers or product people use this term continuous discovery, often what they're actually referring to is conducting an interview a week with a customer. I think that definition is fueled by Teresa Torres's work. She's written a book called Continuous Discovery Habits that I think is pretty popular among product folks, especially right now. I feel like it's having a moment. But if we step back a little bit, I think continuous discovery can also simply mean conducting discovery or research on a continuous basis. So one might think that continuous discovery could be sort of equated with dual track agile, where we have a product team who is running one track that is focused on delivery and another track that is focused on discovery or research at all times, so that you're continuously conducting research. I think for the purposes of this talk, it might make sense to focus more on the sort of an interview a week definition of continuous discovery, because in my experience and what I hear from other researchers in the industry, that's sort of what we're facing right now, is that desire from people who do research to engage in that practice. Why I feel passionate about continuous discovery. I think it can be a little misunderstood in terms of the pros and cons, the benefits and drawbacks. And I think it's sort of a solution that can be applied before we understand the problem that we're trying to solve. And so I love to kind of dig into how this actually looks at different organizations and sort of peel back some of those layers to better understand how it can be beneficial and how it can be a problem.
Amazing. So let's start peeling back some of those layers. And
let's do it.
Yeah. So if you can tell us a little bit more about continuous discovery over there at Teachable, kind of set the stage for how it has evolved since you joined the organization.
Yeah, definitely. So I came to Teachable, like I said, about a year ago. Almost at the same time, Teachable hired a new head of product as well. So we both came on board around the same time. Our head of product is a big advocate for research. It's awesome. And she is very interested in continuous discovery. So with the help of an awesome product operations manager at Teachable, we kicked off basically a pilot to see if a continuous discovery approach is something that we would like to implement at Teachable. Candidly, I think this really did come from our head of product. So this wasn't something that I have been driving, but I have been trying to support the pilot so that we can learn from it. And we're still in the beginning stages. So we just this month, various teams in the pilot have been kicking off their weekly interviews, so we're still learning about it. But the very first thing that we did was get some infrastructure ducks in a row, including adopting Rally, to help us support the logistical side of things without a lot of headcount, which was important. Trying to think of what else would be helpful context to share there. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I guess maybe examples of how it kind of ended up happening in action, and
Yeah.
any impacts you've seen so far, even on the small scale.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things that we have done that I recommend, well, a couple things. First of all, as we were setting up this program and as I was sort of explaining what we were hoping to accomplish to the various product teams that would be taking it on, I set a pretty clear boundary that I was not going to take on the logistics of continuous discovery. Like I said, I'm a team of one, and it just wouldn't be feasible for me, nor would it be like a great way to leverage my skills to have me in charge of recruiting and scheduling and all of the logistics surrounding managing weekly interviews. So that said, I gave these teams, we have 3 different teams sort of in this pilot. I gave these teams a goal. It was a very simple goal of conducting an interview a week for a month. And then we'll regroup and we'll do a retro and we'll see what did we learn from that, what were the benefits and drawbacks. It's gotten, I would say, a little bit of a rocky start, mostly because people who do research are doing many other things with their time. So it's hard to find the time to actually find the right people to interview, handle all the logistics, conduct the interviews, et cetera. As we all know, right? This is what researchers do. It's off to a rolling start, I would say. We have one team that has conducted 3 interviews already in 3 consecutive weeks, another who is behind a few weeks and has conducted 1 interview, another team who hasn't gotten started. And I think that's okay. We're not going to be perfect with this pilot. And that's the other thing I was going to say in terms of encouragement to other people who are interested in sort of trying this out. It does not have to be perfect. And in fact, sort of allowing it to be messy and just jumping into it, I think can be the best thing, just to kind of get over the hurdle of perfection and let your PMs and designers and researchers, if you have them conducting continuous discovery, just get in there with customers to start learning.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're getting lots of questions in the chat, which is great. So we can hop into some of the Q&A because it's very topical. So one question here, Marcella's asking, what's your main goal and what are the topics you are covering when you're conducting 1 interview a week? So maybe reframing this question, when you're working with your PMs or designers, how are you guiding them towards navigating these continuous discovery conversations with users?
Yep, great question. First thing I really emphasize when I'm setting up context with folks is that continuous discovery is not a great way to make decisions or validate decisions. Continuous discovery is a great way to build empathy for users, and it's a great way to generate ideas. So when my teams are setting their goals, I sort of try to emphasize you really don't want to be trying to validate your ideas or making decisions based on an N of 1. That's just bad practice, bad product development. So when we set goals, I invite my product partners to sort of draft their own goals, but I'm like watching for that. And if their goals are around validation, I try to nudge them towards something else. Each team has its own goals, what they're hoping to get out of these interviews, but as a whole, as a pilot, the sort of success metric that we're looking at is, does this help build understanding of our customers? And we measure that by internal survey. So before we set up this program, we ran a benchmarking survey where we asked a bunch of questions about how kind of customer proximity. So, how frequently are you interacting with customers across a number of different touch points? And then some questions around how deeply do you feel you understand our customers? For managers, we asked how well they think their direct reports understand our customers. And ultimately, we're hoping to see those sort of confidence numbers go up as a result of continuous discovery.
Awesome. There is another question here from Steve that I'll paraphrase, but he's basically saying that in his org, PMs are happy to let researchers do the research, but as a small research team, they're trying to encourage PMs to conduct their own research and do so in a responsible way. So what advice would you give someone who's in this position to take on that task for themselves?
Got it. So, and the question is around, as a researcher, how can I support my PMs conducting their own research? Is that right?
Yeah, how can you encourage PMs who are not that interested in doing their own research to go off and do it?
Yeah. Well, my first question would be why? Why are you encouraging PMs to do research? Again, are you trying to make better product decisions? Are you trying to build customer empathy? I don't subscribe to a view that PMs should always be doing research. So I'll just lead with that. So understand the why. If you have a PM that's very interested in research and that makes sense for your organization or your team, but they don't feel, very confident in their research skills, one way to support, again, I think would be to be very encouraging about not needing to be perfect, about being sort of, again, this is depending on the setting and who your users are, but a lot of these conversations can be more casual than sometimes people can, people who don't conduct research can sort of imagine them to be. So, and then, partnering with your PM partner to the extent that you have the time to do that. So, shadowing interviews, letting them lead, giving them feedback. Yeah, those are the things that are top of mind, but I'd be curious to, and I don't know if we have time to dig into it now, I'd be curious to hear more about the context of that particular organization in question.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, jumping to another question here from someone named Delaney. She's asking why they're doing a ton of research that they're capturing, that they're distilling, and that they're sharing with the team. Why is this not enough? Why do you also need to do continuous discovery on top of that?
Great question. I don't think you do. So I think, frankly, I think a healthy product development process is already going to be conducting research on a pretty regular schedule. If you're not doing that, you don't have a healthy product development process. Where I think continuous discovery can fit in is often project-based research will happen, maybe once a month, once a quarter. It's really like a concerted effort, and then there's a gap before the next concerted effort. Although we already sort of talked about dual track agile, and if you have that system in place, that wouldn't be so much of a problem. Continuous discovery can help your product teams stay in contact with your customers throughout those gaps in project-based research. But again, I would challenge, if you're already conducting good research as part of your product development process, your PMs and your designers and your engineers should all already be have access to customers through that research that's already taking place. So I would challenge the idea that you need customer discovery or continuous discovery approach on top of that. One thing I will say, where I do think that sort of a regular cadence of interviews with customers can be particularly helpful, is with growth teams, which often work kind of on a different cycle than other product teams. And they're running like very quick experiments. They often don't build in the time to do very deep discovery. In that environment, I think it can be really helpful to set up a weekly touch point with customers to generate ideas for experiments you want to run. But it's not always like the way to go for all product teams, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super insightful. Awesome. So jumping to another question here, Charlotte is asking another situation. So what kinds of questions do PMs want to pursue in continuous discovery that prompt you to say, that's not right for continuous discovery, let's launch a study?
Mm-hmm. Anytime I see validation questions or goals, so we have a hypothesis that X, and we want to go out and confirm that hypothesis, and it's probably not going to be framed exactly as a hypothesis, but you can kind of tell. So whenever I see that kind of goal, like we are thinking of making this decision, we want to make sure it's the right decision, not great for continuous discovery. And this is somewhere where Teresa Torres and I disagree, I think. If the goal is around like building empathy, better understanding customers, generating ideas, all great goals. I've seen those like validation efforts go pretty poorly with small ends. So never like to encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Great, super helpful. Yeah, you had mentioned kind of that continuous discovery is not really about getting results or making final decisions, and obviously not using single conversations to validate a hypothesis. So maybe you can chime in on what continuous discovery is good for and what are these use cases for continuous discovery.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that it's good for. So we talked a little bit about people who do research, whether they're designers, PMs, or others who want to build their research skills. Having a weekly cadence of just an opportunity to practice interacting with customers, I think is a great way to just sort of build those skills and get feedback on your skills. I think we mentioned sort of if you have a product team that's focused more on growth, oftentimes those folks are focused on new users. Many new users can be low intent. You might have various like abilities to find your high intent users. So often recruiting new users can actually be a little trickier than recruiting sort of your more veteran users. So for that reason, like when I first started at Teachable, I was embedded in a growth team, and I was really interested in understanding the new user journey and experience. But when I went out to recruit new users, it was actually pretty tough to find folks. And so in that situation, I actually turned that into more of a rolling research program. So it was like, okay, well, every week we're going to get a trickle of new users, and that's actually more logistically feasible and also works within that sort of like growth experiment world. Trying to think of some of the other benefits. I mean, I think there's also just like we talked about building user empathy. I think we all know as researchers, it's really motivating to connect with your customers. And there's something especially magical about like doing that one-to-one, interacting with somebody one-to-one, not just watching a recording, not just like seeing a report. And so giving your people who do research at your organization the opportunity to do that, I think can just be very motivating for them to go out and solve problems and be really good at their jobs. So I think that's also a benefit of continuous discovery.
Cool. Yeah, the tangibles and intangibles that have some pretty big impact. Wonderful. So
I will say one other thing I thought to add to that. It can also build a lot of empathy for the craft of research. So anytime that you have someone else in your organization stepping into a research role and really trying to own the end-to-end process of finding the right people, asking them the right questions, I think it helps them understand how much work goes into that and can build a lot of empathy and support for your research team as well.
Yeah, lots of great positive impacts across the board. Perfect. So on the point of empathy, you someone here, Kaylin, had asked a question. What are product teams generally doing with this increased empathy? Are there any supporting frameworks or best practices that you've created to help them do analysis and take action on the things that they're learning in these conversations?
Great question. And I will say we at Teachable have not gotten there yet. So like I said, we're sort of in early stages. We have very scrappy ways that we sort of share the information that's gleaned from these interviews right now. It's literally like we have a spreadsheet where I say, hey, once you conduct an interview, paste your recording in this spreadsheet, link to your note stocks, and in phase 2 of this pilot, we will start figuring out how best to sort of make sure these learnings are shared widely and in a way that makes sense for the whole company. And I guess I just want to say, like, I think that's okay. And I think it's okay to set the expectation that you're not going to have a perfect way to do sense making for all of these interviews that are taking place. I feel like that's fine to have that come as a step 2, but it definitely should come, right? And I think the analysis piece, once you've conducted these interviews, analyzing them, interpreting that information, and figuring out how to take action is often the piece that folks who aren't researchers kind of miss or aren't aware that there are practices there. So while I can't speak to my experience, like building that muscle with people who do research at Teachable, I'm excited to sort of dive into it.
One step at a time. Rome wasn't built overnight. Cool. Jumping up to a previous question here, which is on a lot of people's minds. So when empowering PMs to do research, how do you help them avoid confirmation bias? Jason here has found that many PMs are under pressure to ship features and knowingly or unknowingly start with solutions and then use leading questions and research to support those solutions.
Yeah, well, we can all be guilty of that. Certainly people with a whole lot of research training experience hopefully are less likely to be guilty of that. But I think going back again to what does your product development process look like? How are your PMs building evidence for or against certain decisions that they're trying to make, and not relying too heavily on continuous discovery to be the main source of insights for your product development team. I will say I think it's inevitable that if you are running, if your product organization is running a whole lot of continuous discovery where a whole lot of people who are not researchers are talking to users on the regular, that they will probably make some decisions that are biased based on, recency bias or that N of 1 that they're talking to. I would, just from in past experience, I have been a little bit too nitpicky, I will say, with my PMs about decisions that they're making that feel to me as though they're biased decisions. So what I would say is just be careful and make sure that you're building strong relationships with your partners. So if a bad decision is made, but it's not going to burn the company down, it's not going to be harmful for your users in some important way, consider letting it go, but document. So if you see that poor decisions are being made, document those decisions and have a conversation with somebody maybe higher up in the leadership chain, head of product, so that you can kind of make a case for what you're seeing and how that should shift, how the sort of research and practices in your organization should shift away from a continuous discovery model, or like in it bringing in other types of research to support that decision making as well as continuous discovery.
Awesome, super insightful. Jumping down to a more tactical question from Crystal here. Do you compensate or offer incentives for continuous discovery sessions?
Yes. I almost always offer incentives for any any research we're doing, anytime we are interacting with a customer and trying to extract value from that customer, so getting feedback from them, I'm a big proponent of offering incentives. I don't think everyone does all the time, but I always try to do that. I will say in sort of a B2B situation or a situation where you have users who you might be talking to who are also supported by other members of your team. So for example, at Teachable, we have customer success managers who have certain clients or users on their books of business. Whenever we're talking with them, I make sure that I check in with my customer success manager partner to better understand sort of the dynamic there and whether a small gift card would be seen as something that they appreciate or I don't know, would seem too trifling. So I always check in with the people who I think know our users best before making those decisions.
Cool. Super helpful. And another question from Crystal here on this topic of recruitment and participant management. She's wondering if a continuous discovery program may limit the ability to recruit for niche audiences for other research needs, because you're overtaxing or overusing a pool of people. And I imagine it's very situation based depending on your organization, but if you have any insight on that piece.
Definitely, there's a risk there. Again, depending on how big your user base is. If you have a relatively small user base, then you're going to have to find a way to prioritize who you talk to and for what research purpose. A little shout out to Rally here. I don't think that we could have kicked off this pilot without Rally. We are able to track very easily within Rally who has been talked to most recently. We can exclude those people from our next research send. So Rally makes it actually quite easy for us to avoid overtaxing people. But we have a user base that is, I'd say, large enough that it doesn't become a huge problem very often. I also work with our product teams who are doing this continuous discovery pilot to make sure I'm aware of the audiences that they are targeting and can try to intercept any sort of collisions that I see that might happen. And at least in our case, I've been able to sort of put those different or lead those different teams to different audience segments so they're not overlapping too much. Definitely a concern though, again, if you have a smaller user base, and that would just be, I think, another conversation that you would have around what's the highest priority research that you need to be doing as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jumping to another question. I know there's a ton of questions here in the chat, so I appreciate you all continuing to ask them. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But Charlotte is asking here, if you ever worry that continuous discovery will put the integrity of research at risk. So for example, the idea that people only get to know the hammer and start only seeing nails and wonder why the researcher is walking around with a full tool belt.
Interesting. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, I think the concern is around if we're doing sort of this maybe a simpler form of research, we lose the appreciation for some of our more sort of complex methods that we might use to really drill into a problem or question. And how does continuous discovery play into that? Again, I feel like it comes back to making sure you're aligned on what continuous discovery is for and what it's not for. So if you're really trying to answer a question with precision and high confidence, you're not going to use continuous discovery. If you have a sophisticated product org and some level of research maturity in your organization, there's going to be an appreciation for methods that are not continuous discovery. I know we don't all have the benefit of working in an org that's has high UX maturity, and so yes, it could. There could be a risk to offering a continuous discovery or introducing a continuous discovery approach in a low UX maturity organization, and maybe it's just not warranted in those organizations.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And this kind of brings up a similar question that Amanda had on kind of the size of organization or the maturity level an organization needs to be to adopt continuous discovery and do it well. So if you can chime in on kind of maturity of UX and where continuous discovery fits into that latter framework that we're all familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this is so much tied to UX. Well, I think it is in some sense. Your company has to be at a place where it's willing to invest in research operations to some extent in order to make continuous discovery even possible, without sacrificing the experience of research participants pretty dramatically. So if you're not in a place where you have some buy-in for bringing on tools like Rally, for maybe a research ops headcount, I wouldn't encourage introducing continuous discovery at your organization. And then, I mean, I think that can lead to the question of like, well, what if people are asking for it nonetheless? And that's where you just have to make a decision about how much you want to kind of try to stand in the way, use your persuasion skills to direct folks elsewhere, or let something sort of happen and run its course while you focus somewhere else, because you understand that in order to be best leveraged in the maturity level of your organization, you will be focusing elsewhere. And sometimes that can be the best tack to take.
Yeah, the dynamics can get tricky, but this is all super helpful. Another question here from Katerina. What is your take on the difference and overlap between continuous discovery and democratization of research? I feel that more often than not, folks use that interchangeably.
Yeah. Again, going back to like, how do we define continuous discovery? I think a lot of us, myself included, are sort of influenced by Teresa Torres's definition and approach, which is sort of by definition, a product manager, designer, and maybe an engineer are conducting weekly interviews. So in her model, researchers like are there if the company has the luxury of having a researcher, but the three main people conducting these interviews are not researchers. So by its very nature, according to her definition, continuous discovery is a democratized approach. Doesn't mean that, again, that product teams can't have a discovery track that's being led by a researcher. That is a continuous process. So certainly research can be taking place on a continuous process led by a researcher, but often when we hear this term continuous discovery, I think folks are using it to reference a pretty democratized approach where the researcher is not necessarily the one conducting interviews.
Awesome. Another tactical question here, which probably came up when you were answering the incentive question, but Meredith here was asking if you ever run into ethical pushback on offering incentives, talking with educators. So I believe you've worked with educators in past roles.
Yeah, interesting. This is where I just want to have a conversation with everyone who's asking a question.
Yeah.
I don't think I have. Oh, I think I understand the context now. So thinking about educators who might be sort of like in the K through 12 school system, oftentimes are not supposed to receive, I think, sort of incentives. I have never run into that that argument. So yeah, I can't speak to it much, but I feel pretty passionately about offering incentives to pretty much any user that we talk to. So would be happy to follow up with you one-to-one outside of this to help you make an argument for that if I can be helpful.
Cool. That sounds great. We have another question here from Karen back on democratization piece. So she writes here, helping with democratization falls on the researcher a lot of times, which is super hard, especially for a team of one like yourself. She feels like a teacher and researcher on one. How do you find that balance?
It's hard. There's no way around it. It's tough. It's usually, if you're a research team of one, you are almost certainly being asked to do the work of several full-time roles. And so you have to be judicious. I think it gets easier the more experience you have having to prioritize so many things. I think my encouragement is just to keep practicing, stepping back, reflecting on if you are focusing on the things that are the highest leverage for the organization. Go back to your company level goals. Is what you're doing day to day this week actually helping you reach those metrics that you're trying to reach or accomplish those goals that the company is trying to accomplish, not just this product pod over here who might be one of 20 product pods. And if you're not doing that, investigate why and what is within your control to shift. One example of this, like I said, is when we kicked off this continuous discovery pilot at Teachable. I made it very clear, you all are in charge of logistics. I am not going to be spending my time recruiting and scheduling for you because I am busy doing these other things that I think are more critical to the organization. And if the month ends and it turns out that this didn't work, they didn't have the time to actually manage those logistics themselves, that's a great learning. But we wouldn't come to that learning if I was trying to take it on and sacrificing other things. So I feel you. It's hard. There's no like silver bullet, but I think building in constant reflection and sort of changing course when you realize you're not working on the highest leverage things is one way to go about that. Also, just making sure you have if possible, you have a direct channel to senior leaders in your organization to make sure you are very in tune with what the highest priority projects are. And you can ask them, you can say, these are like the 20 things on my plate right now. Help me prioritize these so that I'm being leveraged in the best way.
Yeah, awesome. That's always good to hear. In real life, how this all shakes out, because there's a lot of demands for research teams of one. And yeah, so if you can maybe chime in a little bit more on that relationship with leadership, how to not only work with them to figure out what your highest priorities are, but maybe also how you can convey the impact of all the work that you're doing from the rest of the organization to leadership. How is that dynamic? How does that dynamic play out within your organization?
Yeah. Again, so much of it depends on context. But oftentimes, especially if you're a research team of one, you're the first researcher in an organization, I would say it's common for organizations not to know where to put you to best leverage you or how to best leverage you. In the company that I was at previously, Outschool, I had this very unique and fortunate situation where I was actually hired as the 21st employee, which I think is very rare for a company that small to invest in a full-time user researcher. And because of that, I was able to work, I reported directly to our head of product. And as we scaled the organization, we actually scaled our research team at a 1-to-1 ratio with designers and a 1-to-1 ratio with PMs. Totally unheard of, like very luxurious situation. And I think a big part of the reason that we were able to make that happen was because I had such an early connection with our head product, and I was there before we started to dramatically scale. when you're entering an organization that has already scaled to some extent, oftentimes you have to take it kind of slow and build that understanding, build the UX maturity of your organization one step at a time. One thing I will say is that the CEO or your head of product or some of the senior leaders in your organization might not know that they should reach out to you for regular one-to-ones to ask you to answer questions that are on their mind. So don't be afraid to just take the initiative, get a meeting on the calendar, and lead with proposals. So don't go into a meeting with your superior and just ask them, what should I be focused on? But show them that you have taken in all the information that is available to you about the company's priorities, where the needs are, propose some different options, and let them react to those options. I think that'll show senior leaders that you are paying attention, that you're bright, that you have important ideas about how to move the organization forward with more information, more data that you can collect, and start to build that relationship so they start to rely on you for important data and decision making.
Love that. Love that. Really cool that you were able to scale an organization with that type of makeup as well. What did that look like? Is that, I guess, two questions. Firstly, what did that look like, and is that desirable? Is that the end goal of any environment that you want to be in, or is there another more desirable end goal for where research fits in the organization?
This is also a topic I'm very passionate about, as I think you know, Oren. It would be a beautiful thing if every product organization had, or every product team or pod to some level had research support, I think. I will say my take is I'd like us to focus less on titles and more on skill sets and interest. So if we have a product team that has a PM that has a very strong research background and skill set, awesome, let's make use of that. We have a designer on that team that has a very strong research background. Great, let's make use of that. But let's be honest and look at our product teams and be honest about the skills that exist on those teams. And if there aren't strong research skills present, let's bring somebody in who has those skills. I guess the other thing I would mention about the way that this worked at OutSchool, my previous organization, is I was pretty passionate about research supporting decision making across the company. So while we reported into the product organization, I also researched every researcher on my team so that they were supporting not only a certain part of the product organization, but also other teams. So we had dedicated support for our community team and our customer experience team and our nonprofit arm. And, so each researcher took on not just helping a particular pod or product team, but they also were sort of a direct line for those other teams that are all making decisions, and they want to be making decisions with data, and they need our help too. So that was one way that I sort of was able to build the argument that we needed these folks. And I think it worked really well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for painting that picture. We have another question here, lots of upvotes from Rob Solomon about sales and customer success. So obviously these teams are having conversation with customers all the time. How do you mitigate silos of thought building up when they are working independently from the efforts of a product organization?
This is such a great question, and it can be such a problem. How do you mitigate silos of thought building up when they are working independently from the efforts of a product organization? Well, first of all, I guess my instinct is to say I'd love for them not to be working completely independently from your product organization. And I think this actually gets back to your prior question, Oren, about where I see research really offering value in the sort of the org structure. I would love to see research leadership that actually owns not just design research within an organization, but owns the entire process of how the organization learns, including how can the product team learn effectively from all of the insights that are being collected from cross-functional teams like support and customer success. I think lots of people have, who are probably much smarter than me, have developed really great systems for that, for making sure that those 2 departments or 3 departments or whatever are really like have a tight feedback loop and are talking to each other. But oftentimes there's no owner for that loop, that feedback loop, that has the background and skill set to make that feedback loop work well. So questions come up around who aggregates and synthesizes the data that the customer support teams and success managers are bringing in, who helps them document the data in a way that will be actionable to product teams. How do we ensure that the data isn't delivered in a way that's biased? Like all of these kinds of questions, I think researchers are really well positioned to help with because they're so related to what we do every day. But this didn't answer the question. I don't want us to skirt around the question. I'm trying to think of some of the ways that we've done this. At Teachable, I've partnered with one of our customer success managers to work on some of these things. So working with her directly on, are there different ways that we can have your team collecting data? Can we consider recording the conversations that you're having if customers are okay with that, so that we can share some of those clips with the product org. Let's talk about how you're reporting out on the data you're collecting and tweak it so that it can be more actionable to the product org. So I think I enjoy playing a role as sort of a mediator between product orgs and some of the other cross-functional teams that are getting a lot of customer feedback on the regular. And if you do too, I would just kind of encourage you, if you have the time in your organization, to, again, just take the initiative and start those conversations and step into that role. If you see those silos happening, propose alternatives to what you're seeing.
Amazing, amazing, super insightful, Megan. We are running up on time. We just have 2 minutes left or so. So maybe we can start wrapping up. And if you could summarize at a very high level, kind of what should be the takeaway for today on continuous discovery? What is, and obviously every situation is going to be different, as we know, but what is maybe the first thing that someone who's thinking about implementing this can start to do tomorrow or today?
Yeah, good questions. I think the biggest takeaway is ask yourself why you want to implement a continuous discovery approach. If it is to build empathy, consider all the other ways that people in your organization can build empathy for users, and consider if continuous discovery is the right way to go forward before you start implementing it. So that's suggestion number 1. I think suggestion number 2, get your infrastructure and logistical ducks in a row. So again, at Teachable, we brought on Rally. We had dedicated support from a product operations manager, which was amazing. And we worked on like adopting that tool, onboarding people to that tool before we started our continuous discovery pilot. So make sure that you have some level of logistical sophistication before you jump into it. And third, like, just don't be a perfectionist. Jump in, let your people who do research start talking to users. They will learn as they go. Again, I think the context here is important, like safety and confidentiality should always be top of mind, but as long as you feel confident that those things are going to be protected, go for it. And I guess the fourth thing, protect your time and set boundaries around the support that you will offer for this program. Also, just want to say, I love this topic, and I would love to talk with anyone one-to-one outside of this arena if you want to follow up. So don't be a stranger.
Yeah, Amazing. Well, an hour can really fly. Thank you for all your incredible insights. Can't wait to see the wrap up, and we will share with everyone here a link to the recording and the recap. So thank you again, Megan. And if you're
Thanks so
interested
much
in
for
checking out
having me.
Rally, feel free to go to our website. And yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Megan.
Awesome. Thanks, Soren.
Bye, everybody.